But many years ago, prayer meeting was a time that we came to church just to pray. Some churches used to have tarry meeting. It wasn't to have a concert. It wasn't to have the latest preacher in the community to come preach. It was simply to pray. And folk meant business. We gathered around the altar, got down on our knees, and talked to God and waited for a breakthrough. One of our late deacons shared the story of a time when in the community there was a long and devastating drought. And the church chose not to stand idle. Nothing was happening, and they left home and brought their umbrellas because they expected when they finished praying that some rain would start falling. Passionate prayer is still a part of a healthy church. It's wonderful to have a lot of other programs and outreach and everything else, but there comes a time when we have to spend time in prayer. When that's the only thing we're going to do tonight. We're not going to have testimony. We're not going to have a whole lot of this or that. We're just going to come together and pray. Faithful fasting. Some things will only happen when we turn our plates down. And it's amazing, when we first got saved, many of us, that was something we did pretty regularly. Didn't mind turning our plates down and giving up the chicken and the chocolate cake and the banana pudding. But as time passes, we get to a place where maybe I don't need to fast anymore. Some things only come through fasting and prayer. And then there's community consciousness. I use that term to describe a sensitivity to the community that we're in and our willingness to impact that community for the cause of Christ. And to be able to design ministry to touch the hearts and minds of those around us. Think about it from this standpoint. If we're in an area where, and in some communities you have public housing where you're going to have, in many cases, a lot of young people and young adults and things of that nature, well, it makes sense to be aware of that. So how do we position ourselves in our ministry to take care, to reach this harvest that's right before us? If we have seniors around us, what does that mean in terms of ministry? And how do we reach out to them? And how do we engage them and make sure that they realize that they have not been forgotten? Those who serve faithfully with us and for us. So those things are things that I believe are certainly symptomatic of a healthy church. And we thank God for those churches who are in that position where these kinds of things are occurring and happening, and it's not an afterthought. It's just something that you do because it's ingrained into your spiritual DNA. The challenge for us is identifying the symptoms of spiritual sickness when they start to appear. Most doctors will tell you that early detection is key for a cure. If we can find it early enough, we can fix it. The same is true, I believe, as far as the church is concerned. So let's consider some symptoms of spiritual sickness. Action without anointing. Action without anointing. It is so easy to get caught up in doing stuff. And I believe that if we're not careful, we move to a place where God moves in a very powerful way, and then we assume that we got to do it the same way every time. So if on that Sunday we took 2 steps into the sanctuary, and then we went back out and we turned around twice and then came in front at the front door and stopped halfway down the aisle, and then went back out and then came all the way down, and then the Spirit moved. If we're not careful, we start doing the very same thing every Sunday because we're trying to replicate what happened, not realizing that the God that we serve, we can't confine him. We can't put him in a box. We can't tell him what to do or how to do it. All we have to do is just surrender and say, God, I'm willing. How do you want and realize that God's blessing and his presence is manifested not only when we're swinging off the chandelier, but when it's just as quiet, you can hear a pin drop. However God so chooses to do it. So we have to be careful that we're not caught up in action without anointing. And then motions without momentum. It's amazing to me when we survey the church world and we see so many that are, we duplicate what we see. We're going to deal with copycat later, but we duplicate what we see. So if Sister Tawana decides to take off running around the church, here the rest of us go, right behind her. Well, Sister Tawana is running because the Spirit of God moved her and she's so excited, and that's her way of expressing what God is doing today. And I can run behind her and she comes back and she's just as calm, she's not out of breath. And I get back and I'm puffing and puffing and not careful, I might have to call the rescue squad to come get me. Motion without momentum. We're just doing stuff without God being in the mix. Spiritual stagnation. And I sincerely believe that this is a challenge to the church in 2019. That we have to be sensitive to what God is doing. And because we've done whatever we've done, the way we've done it for 50 years, does not necessarily mean that we do it the same way today. I was mentioning yesterday that for many, many years, 11 o'clock was standard as far as morning worship was concerned. But then some realized that people may have to go to work. And so they decided, well, let's try an 8 o'clock service. And people showed up and were blessed and the like. And then as the seasons passed, people realized that some folk can't make it on Sunday. So maybe we need to have service on Saturday night. Whatever it takes to reach and to minister to people, we should be willing to be sensitive to that and not allow the fact that we've done it a certain way to be the way we always have to do it. As long as we don't abandon the tenets, the foundation of our faith. Certainly, there's a thin line sometimes, but we have to be sensitive to what God is doing and not allow ourselves to get spiritually stagnant as we serve the Lord. Declining convergence and baptisms, and I sincerely believe that that's an issue for many churches. When we go an entire year and we don't have one baptism, it's probably a sign of the church being on life support. What are we going to do when these precious saints that have been the pillars of our local congregations, when they make that transition from time into eternity? What are we going to do if we're not having conversions and baptisms? People receiving Christ as their personal Savior and making that bold commitment to follow the Lord. Inward focus. The story is told, and I'm sure many of you have already heard it. The story is told of a concern that people had on a very treacherous coastline. And so they decided to build a lighthouse to be able to spot ships that were in trouble. And so with the lighthouse being built, those who manned the lighthouse were very sensitive to those ships that were out and making sure that the light was cleared to prevent people from being in a situation where they were in danger of being shipwrecked. But over time, they made the lighthouse nicer. They put in plush chairs, and put a flat screen in, and they put air conditioning in, and they put a nice food bar in, and the nicer the lighthouse got, the less frequent they went out to check on those who were in trouble. As the body of Christ, we have to be so careful that we are not inward focused. One of the ways that we have to do that is look at our budgets. When you examine your annual budget, how much in your budget is dedicated to outreach, to touching lives outside of the church? And then how much is just committed to us having another service to have another big meal, taking care of my cousin and my sister and my friend and everybody else who went to the hospital because they broke their fingernail, because our rule says you got to go to the hospital to get a check. So I got to make sure I go to the hospital and I report that. How much is focused on touching lives outside of the church? Selfish leadership, when it becomes all about the pastor and what else the pastor can get. No concern about the welfare of the church. And I was told, Bishop Hughes, I know it doesn't happen if we were Baptist connection, but I was told about a pastor, this has been probably 15, 20 years ago, about a pastor who was serving a decent-sized church, and they raised a love offering for his appreciation service, and they gave him in excess of $20,000. Well, I thought that was a very generous offering at the time, especially, and the pastor probably informed the deacons that y'all take this back and you give me what I said I wanted. That's a sad commentary when the church becomes just about the pastor. It has to be about God. I sincerely believe that every church ought to take care of the pastor, and it should never even be an issue. But the focus should never be on how do we make sure that the pastor gets all of the stuff that he wants, and the church gets neglected. You know, it's falling in, the roof needs repair, the floor is buckling, and he still wants an increase in his salary. Something's wrong with that picture. And then substitution of church work for the work of the church. There's a difference between church work and the work of the church. And we should never confuse the two. We can get caught up in committees that at the end of the day don't really do anything. They meet, they talk about stuff, they go out, and they come back, and they meet again, they talk about stuff, they go out, they come back, they meet again, talk about stuff, they go out, and never accomplish anything. It's important that we focus on making a difference as far as the body of Christ is concerned, and remember what we're about. We're the only, and I use the term business, we're the only business in business to go out of business. We're the only business in business to go out of business. We're in business to win the loss. If we can win all the loss, then we can go out of business. Of course, we realize that won't happen, but that's what we hope to do. We want everybody saved. God is not willing that any should perish, and neither should we. We should be. And then programs without purpose. This is a sensitive area that sometimes churches struggle with confronting. As time passes, focus will change, and how we do effective ministry will change. And so we have to be willing to ask ourselves the hard question: does this ministry still need to exist? One of the things that we try to do at the church that I serve is from time to time look at how can we consolidate ministries. We have 33 ministries at present at the church, and I'm the first to admit I believe that's too many. Each one was birthed out of a valid need at the time, but is it so distinct that it cannot be rolled up into one ministry? For example, we have cart driver ministry, we have a greeters ministry, we have an ushers ministry. Well, as far as I'm concerned, all that is simply hospitality. So why not have a hospitality ministry that has all these things? What it does, it frees up people from having to meet 3 times. I'm a member of the car driver ministry. I'm a member of the greeter ministry, and I'm an usher. And so I got to go to 3 meetings every month when I only would have to go to 1 meeting and still be effective. We impose a lot of things on people, and we forget about they have families, they have jobs, and the like. We want them to still be excited about coming to the house of God as opposed to ducking when they see us coming, or letting the call go to the answering machine because we don't want to answer. They're asking me to do something else. So it's so very important, I believe, to ask the hard question: do we have programs without purpose? It's a good idea, sounded good at the time, and it served us well for a season. But because a ministry starts does not mean that it has to continue to exist within the church structure, if in fact the need no longer is there. And then lastly, as we think about the symptoms of a church that's on life support, increasing iniquity. I know that may sound strange to God's people, but if we're not awfully careful, numbers become such a driving force for us that we lose sight on the fact that we are called to live holy, that we are called to be a separated, consecrated group of believers. And if we're not awfully careful, we close our eyes to a lot of things that are happening simply because we want numbers. And I don't know about you, but in my journey through life, I found that there's some things that you have to deal with or it will destroy you. And sin is one of those things. The church has to be aware that as iniquity increases, it is headed to a sure death. The church, Jesus said, ye are the light of the world. A city that sits on a hill cannot be hid. People don't come to the church to see what they can see elsewhere. They come to the church because of the hope that we say we have, and their desire to get some of that hope and to walk into that place where they experience a difference in their lives. If we don't take that mindset, and this is not, again, let me make sure I'm clear what I'm saying. I'm not talking about us being in a position where we think we are holier than thou, and we look down on folk. I believe that one of the best ways of showing that we are Christians is in how we live each day outside of the 4 walls. As a matter of fact, if I may, Bishop, let me just quote something that was shared with me earlier this morning. One of our members does what we call morning manna. And this is what she says. She says, what if, when we wanted to share our beliefs with others, we had to do it solely by our example? What if, when we wanted to share our beliefs with others, we had to do it solely by our example? Would you really be able to convince someone to come to Christ? Actions speak louder than words. Does my life reflect Christ on the job, in school, at home, or wherever it may be? When iniquity is allowed a place in our hearts, very often that is not the case. So I want to consider some contributing factors as we think about life support and why we get into that place. It ought to be noted that some churches were launched without God's approval and were doomed before they had that first service. I got upset with Bishop Hughes because he rebuked me. That's right. And so I'm mad. Yes. And so I'm going to get my wife, my daughter, and my son, and my cousin, and my best friend, and we're going 2 doors down and start our church. The Redeemed Original Free Will Baptist Church. It was doomed before it started. And unfortunately, that is prevalent today. And I'm not quite sure what the motivation is for so many who want to be a bishop. And so Bishop Hughes wouldn't consecrate me, so I'm mad again, and I want to be a bishop. So I go out and start me the whosoever will come to my house church. And so I install my wife as a pastor. I'm consecrated as bishop. And so I'm the bishop of one church with 3 members. Doomed before it started. Some churches never get out of the neonatal intensive care unit. They never grow beyond the founding family. It's been 15 years since we started. So I invited Bishop Perry and Perry's Temple in Union View. They did my appreciation service. Bishop Luke and Faith Temple Extension 1 and 2 Extension. Faith Temple 1, they came and did my 2nd anniversary. Bishop Hughes did my 3rd anniversary, and Bishop Smith did my 4th anniversary, and Bishop and Elder Morrison did my 5th, and Elder Stevens did my 6th. And every time that everybody came, 10 years, it's still me, my wife, and my son. 10 years. Some churches are consumed with busyness. We're doing things that really are not beneficial. It's just we're busy. I believe we have to make that assessment, stop, take the time to ask the hard question, is this really making a difference? And it's not. Nothing wrong with just saying, we're not going to do this anymore. Some churches struggle with finding their own identity and suffer from a copycat spirit. I went to Faith Temple number 2, and I saw how they did everything. I saw how they had their pulpit laid out. I saw how the choir was configured. I saw how the aisles were designed. And so the next thing I do, I'm going back and calling a meeting. We got to change how our church is laid out. When I went, they were just blessed. People were standing on the outside of the church trying to get in. And so we got to do the same thing. And so I take the mold that God made specifically for Bishop Hughes and try to impose it where I'm at. And I don't consider that I'm not in Capitol Heights, Maryland. I don't have the population around me that Bishop Hughes has. I'm not Bishop Hughes. And so with that, I've got to understand what works for Bishop Hughes may not work for me in my setting. Nothing wrong with being inspired by other people. Some of you remember, this has been years ago, but some of you remember when, in our local area, and many of you may remember Bishop Matt Timberlake. Anyone that name familiar? And several others who had a more casual looking pulpit area. It's amazing how many churches went out and took all their nice church furniture out, threw it away, got rid of the choir stand, redid the pulpit area, put the Queen Anne chairs in the pulpit, and got them a clear lectern, and thought they were another coming of Bishop Timberlake. Guess what? They spent all that money, and they still had the same church they had before. Copycat. Some churches struggle with growing too fast, and may struggle with assimilation without alienation. Assimilation without alienation. In other words, when you look at any congregation, the desire is for it to grow. But as a church begins to grow, sometimes there is a shift in power, there's a shift in influence, there are shifts in a number of other things. And unfortunately, there are some people who really don't want to grow beyond the family. They want to stay in control. We've been in control for 137 years. Ain't no need to change that. So when Bishop Blue comes and the Lord is just blessing and just sending people out of everywhere and coming and so the balance of power, as they say, has shifted. They become nervous. Well, one of the things that we have to consider is, don't we want people saved? Don't we want people serving? And if we get enough folks serving, then we don't have to do everything. We don't have to have 15 jobs in the church. And so part of it is coming to a place where we're able to bring people in, welcome them. Brother, we're glad to have you. One of the things that we tell our folk when we receive them, Bishop Hughes, is if people will come to the pastor oftentimes before they join, they'll ask the question, I believe the Lord's leading me here, and I just want to talk with you, pastor, to kind of get a feel for. And my response to them, God bless you, brother or sister. I'm glad you have an interest. But if God has not led you here, then I don't want you to come. Because I want them to be where God wants them to be. And so when people come to me and they say, the Lord is leading me to go somewhere else, pastor. I believe my season here is over and whatever. And I said, well, God bless you. I said, well, did the Lord tell you to leave? If they tell me the Lord told them to leave, we celebrate their time with us. God bless you. We're glad that you were able to stay as long as you have for the contribution that you made. And we pray God's blessings upon you. Just like we receive people, they have to come up front when we receive them into the church. We do the very same thing when they leave, when they let us. But oftentimes, folk will duck out the back door. You won't see them anymore. And then you run out and see them in Walmart. Hey, brother, how you doing? Fine. Where you been? Well, I joined the church down the road. You didn't tell us. If God led you, then just let us know so that we can make the appropriate adjustments and we're not hounding you and asking you why you're not in church. But as you bring people in, you don't want to alienate the folk that are here. The brother and sister has been faithful all these years, teaching Sunday school when nobody else would, and now we get a PhD who love God, and we want to move that faithful brother or sister out of the way. Well, sometimes that's not the right thing to do. We don't want to alienate those that have got us to this point. There's a way we can work together. Some churches don't detect the dreaded infection that I call gradualism. And gradualism is that slow decline in the church that goes unnoticed by the congregation, but the effects are devastating. It happens gradually. The drop-off is gradual. And before we know it, we've lost 50% of our members, and we still think everything is fine. The offering starts to drop, and before we know it, we're in critical condition. If we're not careful, we are in this downward spiral. The end result is the church that's on life support. I want to do this and try to wind up. There's a case study in the Word of God that we want to look at as far as the church being on life support. And I'm sure that we all are familiar with it. It's found in the book of Revelation, chapter 3. It is the church at Laodicea, church that was in serious condition on life support. John records Jesus' letter to the church as he tells them about their condition. Number one, it was lukewarm. Would you either cold or hot? You're lukewarm. And so that makes me sick and makes me want to throw up. So the church was lukewarm. This on fire, in love with Jesus, sold out church got to a point where it became lukewarm. And then it was delusional. How it looked at it. I'm rich and we increase with goods and we have need of nothing. We got it going on over here. How's your church? We're blessed and highly favored. We could hardly get out of church Sunday. It was 4:30 before we turned out. We started at 11 o'clock. Spirit was so high you could cut it with a knife. touch. Just didn't know where they were. Okay. So, what causes the church to become lukewarm? Anyone want to just very, very brief idea, thought? Why does the church become lukewarm? You forget where the old landmark is. Forget what brought us to this point. We don't need Jesus anymore. We got this God. We got this. Go down to the church next door. We can handle it over here. We've been doing this so long, we don't need you. We leave our first love. That was the indictment against the church at Ephesus. You left your first love. Let Jesus be the focus of every church and why we come together and the fact that we love him. We leave the fire. It's amazing how that happens. I grew up at a time, Bishop Blue, when we lived in the country. And it was before the days when we had all these nice central heating and cooling systems in the houses. I grew up at a time when you went outside, cut wood, brought it in the house. We had central heat, but it was in one room. Has anybody ever heard the term front room? Yeah, I think we got some aliens in here. You would fill the heater up with wood, and everybody would stand around in the front room. At one time, we didn't have doors. We had the door open, but we didn't have doors. We would put up quilts. See, I'm not ashamed to tell you where I came from. Put up quilts to the opening to keep the heat in. And we stand behind the heater and get warm. Stand behind the heater. And anybody ever had the back of your legs get so hot you can hardly stand there? Had to pull your pants off your leg. How you back up and stand there long enough because you know you got to make that run to the bed. Ain't no heat in the bedroom. Your head is out and you blow smoke and you see the smoke like you're outside. That was our reality. And you had so much cover on the bed that you almost smother yourself. You get in the bed and hopefully you had enough heat on your legs to stay warm enough until you could warm up under the cover. Well, the easiest way to get cool was to get away from the heat. You gotta stay close to the heater. Yeah. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Legs get seared from all that heat. Absolutely. Yeah. And so what causes the church to be delusional? As we look at Laodicea. One is just focusing on how it used to be. That we get real nostalgic in the church. Man, it ain't like it used to be when grandma was here. I remember how a little boy, how the spirit would be so high. That was wonderful. But if we keep thinking about how it used to be, is everything going well with the church? Yeah. Everything's still going great. The choir's still singing, and the preacher's still preaching, the usher's still ushering. And we don't make allowance for the fact that the choir's gone from 100 down to 3. And the ushers have gone from different rotations to just 3 or 4. One standing there at the door, and that's it. Giving the fans out, and taking the baby out, and closing the door, and everything else. We think about how it used to be. And we're delusional when we don't consider and we ignore how it is. What is our reality? And I sincerely believe that leadership has a responsibility to raise those questions with the church. One of the things that we are embarking upon this year, Bishop Hughes, is what we're calling Operation lost sheep. And basically, when each year we have our membership committee to review, membership ministry to review our church roll, and they will review it and then recommend to the deacons those persons that they believe should be contacted as far as their membership status. And in the past, the deacons would contact them, we would send them official letters and everything else, and after that process, we would then remove them from the roll if we didn't get a response. Well, we got like 40 names, and so I was sharing with our folk Luke 15, where we talk about lost things, the lost coin, the lost sheep, the lost son. And I also made the point that Jesus said that he left the 99 to find the one that was lost. Now, we have care teams at church, which is led by our deacon ministry, and we have 4 or 5, we have a mother, typically a mother, minister, and some other members on those care teams. And they're responsible for contacting our members at least once a quarter. How you doing? Just want to check on you, make sure everything's going well, anything can be of assistance. So it's not like we're just basing it on them coming to church or not, or whatever. So we're trying to reach them. But I was sharing with our church family, would it not make sense for us to do what Jesus tells us in the Word about going out and finding the lost sheep? He didn't say a lost wolf, he said a lost sheep. And so the sheep are ones that are part of the fold, part of the congregation. And so our approach now is we want to go out, we're going to find those persons that are affiliated, who that person knows. Think about it from this standpoint. Each time a person comes to your church, they come for some reason. They come because somebody invited them, because of a family member, or something. But some tie that they have to someone else in the church. We want to find out what the tie is. And then use that person's circle of influence. So if it's a brother, if it's a cousin, if it's a coworker, to include that person in the process of bringing them back into the fold. And beyond that, as far as that's concerned, our contact is based on having them still connected to the body of Christ, which means we're not necessarily out to have all of those persons come back and get back in fellowship with Mount Pisgah. If they've gone somewhere else, that's fine with us. As long as they're under a covering, as long as they're part, being fed the Word of God and active in the church, that's fine with us. Because we look at the body universally, and we know it's about more than just Mount Pisgah. So to the degree that we can engage those persons to the point they will tell us, no, we joined such and such church, and just didn't let you know. That's fine with us. But if they are at home and doing nothing, and they just dropped off the map, then that becomes a fertile field for us to try to compel to come back. And even if they don't come back to us, if they go somewhere else, as long as we don't just let them just languish in this place of non-engagement as far as the body of Christ is concerned. So very important that we do that. So we got to focus on how it is. And then the church is out of touch when we're not looking at the facts, not considering what's happening. And we know that dynamics are changing, and there are general trends that will affect the church that may not affect any given church, but may affect some churches. There has been a general overall decline in all churches. So that's for a church to have a loss of membership isn't necessarily a sign that you have an unhealthy church. Some things are just, again, cultural or just times and seasons, and we recognize that. But when we don't evaluate the ministry, ask ourselves the question, are we reaching the lost? What message are we conveying? What are we sharing? Have we been effective this year? Are we impacting the community? Are we having to feed the hungry, clothe the naked? Or are we just having church? If we don't consider those things, we are on life support. I want to spend the remaining portion of my time just dealing with some reasons why, some reasons we don't pull the plug, and then the last one, just some suggestions. One of the reasons we don't pull the plug is we have what I call eternal optimism. We're going to turn it around. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. We just have a down week, down month, down year. It'll be better next year. God is setting us up for a comeback. Could be, may not be. Not facing reality, not accepting how bad it is. Everybody has gone, Pastor. The piano player took the piano. He's gone. Have you checked, Pastor? The last 3 services just been you, your wife, and me. Not facing reality. Times should have passed. We don't want to let the founders down. My great-great-great-granddaddy was one of the founding members, and I refuse to let this church die. Even if I have to do it by myself. That's a wonderful approach, but it may not be realistic. Pride, we're unwilling to admit it's time to move on. A ministry can have a season. We have to be aware of that. A ministry can have a season. And if the season's over, it's just over. Spiritual insensitivity, not discerning the Spirit's departure. I liken this to Samson. Y'all know the story of Samson, how that God blessed him with supernatural strength, and he found himself in the clutches of a lady who was very sharp named Delilah, and she talked him into telling her his secret, where his strength lied, where his strength, the source of his strength. And all the times prior to then, he would tell her anything. She would do it, and then he would go out and display his strength. And this time she told him where his strength, what the source of his strength was. And she had all his hair cut off, and she said, the Philistines are upon you. And he said, I'll rise and shake myself as before, not realizing that the power was gone. Sometimes that can happen to us. And then simply, it may be a case we just don't know how. We don't know what to do. We know that this season is past, but we don't know what to do. And then to consider the 2 primary reasons why critically ill patients are removed from life support is basically one of 2 things. Either they get better or what? They get worse. Those are the 2 reasons, basically, when one comes off life support. They get better or they get worse. Now, Jesus declared that he came that we would have life and have it more abundant. Therefore, the church should be alive and well. And since Jesus is the life giver, he's able to give life to a church that's on life support if we will commit to giving him the opportunity to bring it back to life. So let's consider some remedies for the church at Laodicea. He told them to buy of him true riches, things that really matter, not the superficial stuff that can be eye-catching and cause people to be swayed, but true riches. And then he told them to don the robe of righteousness. Regardless of what anybody says, I believe that the church should be a place where, and when I say place, we kind of focus in on the building, but we know that the church is in us. And we should be a place where that the righteousness of God is on display. That we're not trying to be like the world. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. Wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate. That's not to go somewhere and live in a monastery off on some mountain. We live in a society, and that's where we will have impact when we are around other people. But with that being said, we still should have a standard that lets people know that we love Jesus. Eye-opening anointing, so that we can see things as they really are, and allow him to show us what we need to do. And then restorative rebuke. Sometimes that's what we need. Just a good spanking, correct some issues, when we got out of line, and that includes leaders. Sometimes we as pastors and people have I think this built-in willingness to trust leadership, and we don't ever want to abuse it because it makes it tough for the next leader. They have to work all that time just to restore some level of credibility, recognizing that we're out of touch and out of place. Then real repentance, just coming to a place where, as Jesus encourages the Laodicean church, just change your mind about some things. And we're going to do it God's way. Sometimes that's the thing that the church has to do. We come together and we pray, and God shows us the problem, and then we gotta conclude, well, we gotta do it God's way. Pastor, we gotta do it God's way. Congregation, we gotta do it God's way. And then when we come to that place of repentance, which really is just a change of mind, we're then able to move forward. And then certainly the renewed relationship with God, that's so very important as we move forward. Building that relationship with Him and walking in that place that He would have for each of us. We have that level of communion and faithfulness to Him. Some practical ways in terms of getting a church off life support. One is effective evaluation, taking a realistic look at the ministry. We have to ask the hard questions. The hard questions. Do we need to sing this song every Sunday, all year long? Should the pastor preach the same message every Sunday? He just changed the title, it was the same message. Effective evaluation. Ministry modification, changing how the church does what it does. There are some things that are non-negotiable as far as the church is concerned, as far as from my vantage point. But there are a lot of things that we can change. And I believe it's important that you evaluate what you can do different. One of the struggles that I've had, Bishop Perry, is what do we do with announcements? Nothing wrong with announcements and nothing wrong with the secretary making the announcements. But sometimes the service is almost through the roof. And now we'll have the announcements. Sister Betty Jones is having a yard sale next week at 10 o'clock in the morning, and she wants all the church to come. We probably didn't need that announcement. So we struggle with how do you pare it down to the essential announcements, and then where to put it on the program. And so we had it after the service, after the message, after all the call. That didn't work because the spirit, many times the spirit was very high, and we didn't want people to leave after we have been blessed by God. They're going to make the announcements. And they come down, and they leave out. What was that all about? And so, at least we've decided to put them at the beginning of the service. They're on the program anyway. Put them at the beginning of the service. We have one call, which allows us to call all of our members at one time and tell them what is up, is coming up, or whatever the case may be. So it's not like they can't get the information. But we didn't want them to be on the roller coaster if we could help it. So we've made some tweaks, and we may tweak it again, but that's part of just ministry modification. Let's use that as a simple example. And then meaningful merger. Combining the ministry with another like-minded congregation in the area. I know we don't like to think about that, but sometimes that's what's necessary. If we got two churches who are like-minded and both are struggling, would it make sense sometimes to just come together and have one thriving ministry than two that are on life support? And then lastly, reflective release. Surrendering the ministry to another congregation. There are many examples in the area where the church that I pastor is, where churches have released their property and membership to another church. And we're seeing this trend of one church in several locations. And they will come in and they will assume the ministry, its financial obligations and everything else, and the name changes to that ministry. But I have noticed, and so far each time that has occurred, as I drive to church and I look out into the parking lots, I see a whole lot more cars than were there beforehand. They released the ministry. There was I'll use this example and then I'm done, Bishop. Let's have some questions. There's a church within our community, a good friend of mine. As a matter of fact, he's the one that shared the quote I mentioned earlier about giving. And he started a campus-focused satellite church. And it was thriving. But the lease on the building was running out. There was a church not very far from there, and of course, have a lot of young people, college students, younger people who were coming to the service. Not very far from there was an older congregation who was on the verge of dying. And so they approached the pastor and they were asking for suggestions about how can they draw young people and everything else. There were no children in the church. You had basically senior citizens. So the pastor said, how about combining those two ministries? You have the older saints and this younger crowd. Let's make one church. Now, the church with the older members, they relinquished ownership of the facilities and everything else, and it rolled under the other church. But the church is doing great. They released their ministry to someone else who was able to that God uses to revitalize. And so nothing's wrong with that. And we have to think like that in this time and in this season. Ultimately, it boils down to each of us having an examination performed to see if, in fact, we are on life support. I pray that none of the churches in the Middle Eastern district are, but so that we never get there, hopefully something has been shared today that will encourage you and inspire you to maintain not only vigilance, but also focus on the church thriving until the Lord comes to receive us. God bless you. Thank you for your time and attention.
Bishop, in the event that someone has a question, would you entertain 2 or 3 questions at this time? If there's someone that has a question for Bishop Hinton, please feel free to do it now.
Yes, sir.